I don't know if you seen Elon Musk ranting the last few days about open
I
source.
was going to ask about that because I've seen you responding to some of his tweets. Yeah, what do you think about him sort of pushing out a dissident voice in such a high profile manner on Twitter?
It's amazing. I mean, when I see richest man in the world posting about open source algorithms, I get warm and fuzzy inside. I've been talking about that for a decade, so that's pretty exciting. But then it's just funny because you see Dorsey respond to this, and he says, "Oh, well, you really just need to give users control over the algorithm," which Twitter doesn't have. Okay, Twitter lets you toggle between a latest and an algorithmic feed, even though the algorithmic feed is the default feed, and they sort of bury the little switcher. And even still, the whole point of Elon's comments is that we don't know what your algorithm is doing in any case. We don't know what shadow banning is happening in the background. It needs to be open source in order to be at all trusted. So, it's just Dorsey like avoiding the open source convo, not trying to take responsibility for the fact that they're not being transparent. And he just seems to do that all the time. So I don't. And then I've been also watching these Zuckerberg podcasts and like throwing up a little bit in my mouth with like Lex Fridman, and then Tim Ferriss interviewed him as well recently. And Lex actually pushed back on the censorship, even though he didn't push too hard on like, what are you going to do about it, Mark? I did respect Lex for, explaining that he's gone overboard, but it's just like, I don't know. He's really entering the podcast circuit. I think a lot of these tech CEOs are realizing, okay, I need to start doing podcasts because this is the new media. They've been avoiding the public eye for so long, but they're just not talking about the core issues. I liked Tim Ferriss, but it was just an hour and a half of talking about Zuckerberg's like routine at home and his personal life and his family and his values and, Facebook's new core values, going through them one by one, not talking about any of the problems. So, it's tough to see, like, 'cause, that everybody has some good and evil in them. Look, Zuckerberg's not entirely evil. He's a smart guy. There's, he's probably a nice dad. Fine.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I always think that the CEOs of these massive tech companies, the ones that have grown so large, like Facebook and Twitter, Zuckerberg and Dorsey, they seem like nerds, tech nerds, who created this initial thing that they didn't expect to get any bigger than, for instance, in Zuckerberg's case, his college campus. And then it spiraled wildly out of his control and created this monster that he's just afraid to speak up about because of the fact that, he's surrounded by all of this stuff. Although, to be fair, at the same time, it is probably somewhat his own values that are being pushed as well. This idea that, I need to have some form of regulation and control over what's said on this, just in case, even if I don't know if it works or not.
Yeah, it's a quandary. I mean, Zuckerberg gave a speech at Georgetown all about free expression, and Lex asked about that as well, and it's just it's a gaslight, because he keeps, in interviews, he'll say he cares about free speech over and over again, but like meanwhile, like, if you asked him, well, how many people have been banned from Facebook today for talking about, X, Y, or Z? And it's just probably like millions of people have been like flagged or suspended like that day. And it's just this elephant in the room where they're acting like they care, but the policy is just so bonkers. So, I do think Zuckerberg has more control in equity than, Dorsey and some of these other CEOs have. Zuckerberg absolutely does have the power to change things. He's certainly afraid of the blowback of, because he does have a mob, telling him to censor more.
I mean, he's got parts of the US government prodding at his back, telling him he needs to censor more. I don't know if you saw Jen Psaki saying, we've been in communication with the social media companies about what we can do to curb misinformation.
Yeah, I would like to do a freedom of information request on those email communications. I've been working on that a little bit on the side. I mean, that was shocking. And yes, so they're getting pressure from every direction. But I've said this a lot. Like it's just surprising to me that there isn't a big tech site, with hundreds of millions of users, who is taking any sort of a more free speech and transparent philosophy, because they would win over a whole major segment of the market. I mean, they could, because that's why all of us alternatives are popping up. Like, there is demand for this, and it seems like odd to me that none of the power players, the ones who really have the ability to just, they could tweak their policy, and then suddenly they would be making a whole new demographic of people very happy. But and I don't know, it's like you speculate, and is it ideological? Like, why wouldn't you have more of a First Amendment based policy? So who knows? But I honestly do want them to change. They're not just going to go away. Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, all of them, they're not going to evaporate in the same way that MySpace did. They're embedded in our worlds on a completely different level than MySpace was. I mean, half of the websites on the world are using like login with Google, login with Facebook. It's like their APIs are just infected. They have infected the whole internet. And, even like, again, I respect Rumble's free speech policy, but they're even using Google Analytics. So like everybody who visits Rumble Rumble is just giving all this user data to Google. Like, we've taken much more of a hard stance in terms of the tools that we're even willing to use when we build our app. So we built our whole analytics system from the ground up so that we don't even know who, we have data, but we can't correlate it with individual users. So it's pseudonymous. And that took us like a year and a half to build, as opposed to, Rumble just like putting the Google Analytics script into their site, takes 5 seconds. You have amazing data, but guess what? So does Google. So that's we're really trying to push the message that to not take the shortcut. And but it's not easy. I mean, look, if you're a business trying to compete, people take shortcuts, but those shortcuts do impact the rest of the world.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, in regards to talking about the market solutions of competitors popping up and the idea that these companies aren't going to fade away, certainly at the moment, I don't see it. I don't know, going into the future, you've got Minds, you've got other companies like Getter and Gab popping up here. So there is becoming more of competition out there for these social media companies. So we'll see what happens in the future. But I definitely agree that for some reason, especially Twitter seems to be the big one that is very difficult to dislodge, despite how censorious they are. Back when I was at university doing a media degree, it was the one place that everybody told us, you need to be on Twitter. You need to be on Twitter because that's where all the journalists are. That's where all of the industry insiders are. It's become, as many have referred to it, as a public platform almost to a certain degree, just because of the access that you get to people that you never had before. 30 years ago, I couldn't tweet at my favorite video game developer and tell them that their latest video game sucked, whereas a platform like Twitter allows me to do that. But now if I do that on that same day, they might just swipe me off immediately.
Well, that is the nuance that I absolutely acknowledge about big tech. I mean, Twitter, YouTube, like, these are brilliant platforms. I mean, their tech, their designers, they have engineers who are geniuses. Like they have thousands of them. They've attracted some of the best talent in the world, and they have built amazing tools. That doesn't mean that the infrastructure is not completely corrupt, both from a sense of surveillance and policy.